Welcome back to Utah Studies. Today, we're learning about Chapter 11. Let's get into it. All right, so Chapter 11 is called Utah's Struggle for Statehood. So at first, Utah is looked upon by the federal government with suspicion. Okay, what are those Mormon people doing out there? Okay. And remember, what was it when they sent the troops to Utah? The Utah War, okay? Nobody died, nobody gets hurt, but it just shows that the national government doesn't necessarily trust Utah as a state. That's going to continue right here, and it's going to be a struggle for statehood. They're not going to want us to be a state the same way that everybody wanted California to be a state because California had gold. Now, this is the story from the government looking on Utah suspiciously, and then Utah becoming a valuable member of the Union. Soon the national government will love Utah, okay? So that's what we're going from. We're going from they're suspicious of Utah to they love Utah. That's what we're talking about, okay? So let's get into this. Okay, so today you need to know the advantages and the roadblocks to statehood. So why does Utah want to become a state? There's advantages politically when you're a state. Okay, that's better than being a territory. Why is it difficult to become a state for Utah anyway? A lot of it has to do with how the rest of the U.S. viewed the Mormons. And then we'll talk about some political parties. So the path to statehood. We asked for statehood 6 times, finally get it in 1896. So we ask, no, again, no. Can we be a state? No. Can we be a state? No. How about now? No. Can we be a state? Finally, yes. Okay, so it's not overnight. You want to be a state. Part of the reason is just respect, because a territory is considered inferior, but really you want to be able to vote in the presidential elections, and you want to be able to write your own constitution, and so you get it's political power. A state, the people in a state have more political power than the people in a territory. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's why you want to be a state, so that you can have a little bit more autonomy over your government. So here are the different roadblocks. We talked about Brigham Young was the head of the church. He was the first governor. He's the head of Indian affairs. Okay, and in general, part of the ethos of America is a separation of church and state. And so the rest of America says, hey, that guy's the head of the church and the head of the state. That's not what we believe in. They look at Utah and they go, you combine politics and religion too much, and we don't like that, okay? So that's one of the roadblocks. Another one is that the non-Mormon people, okay, they believed that they would not get justice. That they would not get justice in Utah because the court system was in favor of Mormon. Whether that's true or not, that's just what they believed. And then lastly, polygamy. People in the rest of the country thought that polygamy was against religion and against common decency. We talked about the twin relics of barbarism. What are the twin relics of barbarism? Slavery and polygamy, okay? And they want to eradicate that. So polygamy is a big reason why Utah's denied statehood, okay? The Mormon argument is that it's freedom of religion, and that's guaranteed in the Constitution, okay? So now we're going to talk about our primary source, and it's Reynolds versus the United States. Pause the video, read the primary source. That way we can talk about it in just a minute. Okay, welcome back. Did you pause it? I don't think you did. Pause it now and go read the primary source. Okay, welcome back. So Reynolds v. United States. By the way, anytime you see something v. something, Marbury v. Madison, that usually means it's a court case, or in this case, a Supreme Court case. So you read it, right? Reynolds versus the United States. What does it say? Okay, Congress can't regulate what you believe, but it can regulate what you do. So let me put that another way. You can believe whatever you want. You can't do whatever you want. This is the #1 court case in America when we're talking about religion. This is the foundation of yes, you have the freedom of religion, but then when we start adding, well, what does that mean? This is one of the foundational court cases, okay? Believe whatever you want, can't do whatever you want. And um, so the result of the case, it's not a defense to say religious beliefs are not a defense for a crime. Okay, you can't say, well, it's freedom of religion, therefore I can commit a crime. Okay, so let's keep going. They have a lot of these different acts, and they're designed to punish polygamists. Okay, so polygamists can't hold office. You go to jail. You can read these different acts and all the different consequences that are associated with them. And so if you do go to prison, you go to the Sugar House. That's the territorial prison. Here's a quick video about Sugar House.
For our History Minute, we go to Sugar House Park, which was the original site of the territorial prison. Back in 1853, plans were drawn up for a territorial penitentiary, and 16 cells were dug into the ground, covered over by iron bars. Through the rest of the 1800s, the prison was expanded by the federal marshals assigned to Utah until control was turned over to the state in 1896. The Sugar House State Pen operated for more than 30 years without complaint, as the site of numerous executions by firing squad, including that of labor icon Joe Hill. It was also used to house polygamists and other ne'er-do-wells. In the 1930s, the growing neighborhood of residents wanted the penitentiary less and less, so a new site for the state prison was sought after. The point of the mountain in Draper was chosen, and finally, on March 12, 1951, all 575 inmates of the Sugar House prison were bused to Draper. Today, the site of the old penitentiary is divided amongst Highland High School and Sugar House Park, which is one of the most popular recreation areas in Salt Lake City.
Okay, the book wants you to know this vocab word called cohab. It's not particularly important to me, but the book wants you to know it, so you got to know it, okay? Cohab, name given to those who cohabitated, okay? Another term for polygamists, okay? Polygamy as a crime is causing problems here in Utah. Men are going to prison, they're going into hiding. Taylor says it's better to go into hiding than to go to prison. You have two main political parties at this time here in Utah. People's Party, which is primarily an LDS party, and the Liberal Party, which is primarily a non-Mormon party.
The same year that Brigham Young died, 1877, was the year of the Reynolds case, deliberately tested by the Mormon Church to test in the Supreme Court whether or not polygamy as a religious practice wasn't protected under the First Amendment. The Supreme Court ruled no, that federal government could in fact rule against or make laws against the practice of polygamy, that it was a practice that offended public morals, and therefore it was not protected under First Amendment. The Mormon Church was shocked but went on. The third president, John Taylor, determined to uphold the practice of polygamy, determined to abide by it as a religious practice, and so he announced that it would continue.
After Governor Murray arrived in Utah in 1880, he wasted no time in raising a candidate to oppose George Q. Cannon as representative for the territory of Utah to the U.S. House of Representatives. Although Cannon defeated the Liberal candidate, Allen G. Campbell, by over a 13-to-1 vote ratio, Governor Murray declared Campbell the winner because Cannon was a polygamist.
In 1869, the National Congress determined that there would be an experiment in women's suffrage in the Western Territories. Safe, few women. Wyoming in 1869, Utah in 1870. And in Utah, there was the added incentive that perhaps by giving the vote to women, they would overthrow polygamy, they would overthrow Mormon authority, and they would become liberated, and this was the solution to solving the question of polygamy. For 17 years, women voted in Utah, and they voted consistently to uphold Mormon authorities running for office. This frustrated people at the national level. They attempted to tinker again with voting procedures, with democracy in Utah. In 1882, the Edmunds Act, denying voting rights to men practicing polygamy. Men were told that they had to take an oath before they could vote, that they had to vow that they were not cohabiting with more than one wife.
In defending the Edmunds Act, Representative Haskell said, "It is the intention of this bill to legislate out of office the infamous Mormon priesthood and give an opportunity to put in honest men." 1 month after the Edmunds bill was passed, a mass movement for statehood was launched. The Constitutional Convention met on April 10, 1882, but once again, Utah was denied statehood. The federal government, in the meantime, chose a new course of action: vigorous enforcement of the anti-polygamy clause in the Edmunds Act.
That still didn't seem to undermine or to throw off the power of the Mormon Church in Utah. So let's try another act, 1887, the Edmunds-Tucker Act. Now we're going to take a vote not only away from polygamous men, but also from women. Mormons practicing polygamy tried various tactics to get out of the way of federal officials. The underground within Utah, moving into the outskirts of the Mormon corridor, establishing locations such as Hanksville that were refuge areas that could easily be dispersed into the hills, into the countryside, even eventually moving into northern Mexico. Not far from here was D.O., the code word for the home in which John Taylor resided on the underground. The underground, hiding out from federal officials as a polygamist, determined to continue the practice, federal officials determined to arrest him. This is where John Taylor died, still hunted, still determined that he would uphold the religious principles of his faith.
As hundreds of men and some women were sentenced to jail terms of multiple years, prisons quickly became overcrowded. By the end of this judicial crusade, the government has spent over $100,000 building new prisons in Utah to house all the convicted polygamists. Besides Corinne, there were other Gentile strongholds. Tooele County, heavily populated with miners, was a stronghold of the Liberal Party and was nicknamed the Republic of Tooele. Park City, a mining community in Summit County, also elected a Liberal candidate to the legislature in 1885. And after the demise of Corinne in 1879, Park City became the unofficial Gentile capital of Utah. In 1887, the battle escalated. Congress passed the Edmunds-Tucker Act, adding a crucial clause to the Edmunds Act of 1882. The federal government declared the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints disincorporated and ordered all property owned by the church in excess of $50,000 to be seized by the government. On July 29, 1887, President John Taylor was buried. On July 30th, suits were filed in Utah Supreme Court to take control of church property.
1887 was the sixth try for statehood, and several things happened at that time, and probably the most important was that the Mormons simply decided this is never going to happen. Well, the liberals and the Gentiles and the federal government feared statehood, because if statehood was granted, then of course the Mormons, they felt, would have a great deal more control. Because of the desire to be a state and to alleviate the fears of those who oppose statehood, the Utah Constitution was much more specific. I don't know of any other constitution, state constitutions, that specifically prohibit polygamy. I don't know of any other state constitutions that have such a strict separation of church and state. In 1889, the result of that sixth attempt was that Utah was denied, but Idaho and Wyoming and North and South Dakota were granted statehood.
In response to this olive branch offered by the church, the government
In Congress and what it will take for us to become a state. And that is why Wilford Woodruff in 1890 issued the manifesto discouraging polygamy among the Mormons. But even then, that was not sufficient. It took several more years because they wanted to watch the Mormons. And that's why it took until 1896 to finally obtain statehood.
We're going to talk about women's suffrage. So what does suffrage mean? Suffrage is the right to vote. So women's suffrage, women's right to vote. Makes sense? All right, cool. Today's are some more objectives for us. What is women's suffrage? The right to vote. Why did the women in the East want women in the West, specifically in Utah, to have the right to vote? They thought that they would vote against polygamy. Does that make sense? Okay. So, and then we'll talk about the Utah Constitution. And there's a give and take with the federal government. So why do you want to become a state? Remember this? We just learned it. Respect, but really political power. Okay, cool. You can vote for the president. You can vote for your legislator, things like that. What were the roadblocks to statehood? Okay. Exactly. The Mormon belief, the Mormons didn't necessarily believe in a separation of church and state the way the rest of the U.S. did. And polygamy is a big one too. Okay, polygamy is the biggest one. So at this time, women are not allowed to vote in the U.S. And Wyoming is the first state to create the law that says women are allowed to vote. But Utah is the first state where women actually cast a ballot. So most of the history books, it'll say Wyoming's the first state where women get to vote. But it depends on how do you define women getting to vote. They get, the law gets passed that says women can vote. That's Wyoming. A woman actually casting a ballot, that's Utah. So whatever. We're first or second, depends on how you describe it. Women were still not allowed to hold office, though, at this time. Okay. Everybody in Utah wants women to vote, but for different reasons. The outsiders think, well, if women can vote, they'll vote against polygamy. Brigham Young says it's going to change the perspective that the women are downtrodden and oppressed. They'll vote, and they'll vote how they want, and then everyone around won't have an excuse to judge Utah anymore. Does that make sense? Okay, I hope it does. Okay, so why do women out west, Wyoming or Utah, why out west? Why do women get the right to vote first? Because the work out west is very difficult, and you're sharing that work, the men and the women. So let me paint, Mr. and Mrs. Jones have a farm. They're both putting the fence up. They're both cleaning out the stable. They're both farming. They're both working. But then only Mr. Jones gets to vote, and Mrs. Jones has no political power. And she's going, wait a second, that's not right. I'm doing the same work you are. And even the men are like, hey, that's probably not fair. They're working hard too. So out west, men and women are equal in work and equal on the farm, and so it becomes more natural that they're equal in politics as well. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's watch this quick video about that.
The vote is the foundation of democracy. It is how we choose the people who pass the laws that govern us. Today, where all adult citizens can vote, it's easy to forget the days when half the population could not. The roots of women voting grew out of the pioneer experience of the West. For women, the crusade for suffrage was one of the longest and drawn-out political reforms in American history. The struggle for reform came to national attention in 1848 at the Seneca Falls Convention in New York, where women and men held discussions concerning the rights of women. It ended 72 years later in 1920 with the passing of the 19th Amendment. While women in the East and Midwest were not able to vote until 1920, thousands of women out west have been casting their votes for decades in local and state elections. The first breakthrough in all-male voting began in 1869 when Wyoming Territory approved full and equal suffrage for scarcely 1,000 women. Through this event, excitement for women's rights spread quickly across the Rocky Mountain region.
It was a very new thing in the middle of the 19th century for women to believe that they were equal with men. From the very ancient world till the middle of the 19th century, when women started to be educated, women were not considered the same as men. And here all of a sudden, along with some of the other reforms that took place around that time, like the abolitionist movement, which was dedicated to getting rid of slavery for African Americans, women started to say, well, we, in addition to supporting this movement, we need to have our own sense of being empowered.
By 1804, the U.S. was growing rapidly. The West was opened through the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, the Homestead Act of 1862, and the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869. Gold was found, creating a dream of wealth and freedom looming on the horizon. Thousands of women and men gave up traditional life in the East in exchange for new beginnings. There was plenty of work to be done, allowing women to alter their gender roles.
Here in the West, women came out with their men to settle the West, and oftentimes the men died. If the women survived childhood, they tended to be stronger and healthier than the men. So the women took over the sheep ranching. The women took over what the men were doing. And in the West, it was kind of like based on your talent and what you could do.
Oregon suffragist Abigail Scott Duniway said, "Nowhere else upon this planet are the undeniable rights of women as much appreciated as on the newly settled borders of the United States."
Okay, back to class. The men died, the women are in charge. That's not always the case, but that's one of the things. The labor is needed on the farm. I'm going to talk to you about this real quick. The formation or structure of government, there's different kinds. In a unity government, say for example, England or something, the parliament in that case tells the states or the substructure what to do, and that's the end of it. The national government has all the power, and the states, they just do what they're told. That's a unity government, okay? In a confederate government, it's the opposite. The states have all the power. So later when we learn about the Articles of Confederation, that means the states have all the power. Or the Confederate States of America during the Civil War, that meant they were fighting for states' power against having the supreme power as opposed to the national government. Which one do we live in? A unity government or a confederate government? Answer, neither. That was a trick question. We live in a federal government where both the states and the national government have power. So for example, right now we have this COVID epidemic. Should the states be in charge of the response, or should the national government be in charge? We could set it up either way. It's sometimes good that both of them share power, but sometimes you have overlapping powers and stuff. Anyway, I just want you to understand you live in a federal government, okay? So one of the primary sources, you get two today. You got, what was the first primary source we read? That's right, Reynolds v. United States. And what did it say? That you can believe whatever you want, but you can't do whatever you want. Here's another primary source. This is the Utah State Constitution, or an excerpt of it. I'm not going to make you read the whole thing. But look at it, and what kind of issues does it address? I want you to read that now. Go ahead. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully you read the Constitution. I didn't give you the whole thing. I just gave you a little bit. But you can see in there that they're petitioning for statehood with this Constitution, or they're embracing statehood. They're saying, look, we're not going to have polygamy and stuff like that. Okay. The Utah Constitution guarantees religious freedom for everybody and prohibits plural marriage. So congratulations, we are now a state. Okay, we are the 45th state. There we go. Oh, they want you to know that. Watch. What number state is Utah? 45 with a little arrow. Now a blue arrow. Now a red arrow. Whoa, that must be on the test. Again, you know, to me, that's stuff you can Google, but the book wants you to know we're the 45th state. I would prefer you understand that the federal government and the rest of America is suspicious of Utah. We don't get to be a state right away, but we're moving along this line, because in the next couple of chapters, USA is going to wrap its arms around us. We love you, Utah. Thank you. Okay, so we go from, are they cool, to, oh yeah, they're part of the family. Okay, so that's the part I want you to see. All right. And then this is from the book. Once you become a state, what do? Noise, cowbell, that makes sense, dynamite, and rifles. These guys knew how to have a party. You have dances, and then 3 cheers and a tiger, which I don't know what that means, but it's probably something like hip hip hooray, rawr. All right? Hey man, I don't know. That sounds like 3 cheers and a tiger to me. Okay. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the lesson. Don't forget that next time, meaning Wednesday and Thursday, you'll have a little quiz. Please take that, and we'll see you back here next week.